Hello everyone, and welcome to the 14th episode of WONDERTALK, where I talk about my character's backstory, playthrough, and his roleplay story. In the last episode, I asked a very important question. Javiik, my Sith Inquisitor, finally ran into a very important part of the Inquisitor story. In the story... Wait! If you haven't played the Sith Inquisitor story, there's about to be some major spoilers. You might not want to listen past this point. Javiik has finally made his way to the temple on Droman Kos, and run into what is supposedly his ancestor, Lord Calig. We don't know a lot about Lord Calig. There isn't a lot of information recorded about him. We do know that he sounds male, he wears a mask, and he's over 2,000 years old. Well, at least his spirit is, because he spent a lot of time with Tulak Horde. We also know that Javiik is a Cathar, the cat-like species in Star Wars: The Old Republic. In the Star Wars lore, sometimes different races or species can have children together, and other times it just doesn't work. Really cool piece of lore that I just found out. If you guys have heard of Dathomir and the Dathomirians, you know, the Dathomir rancor, apparently the species Dathomirians is actually a hybrid between humans and Sabraks. Who knew? There isn't a perfect chart or list out there of exactly which species can have children together, but there is sometimes a list of species that definitely can. For example, the Star Wars Wikipedia says that the human species was able to interbreed with Koinite, Echani, Pharaohan, Madrias, Kefar, Miraluka, Nagai, Sith, Thelan, Twi'lek, and a number of other species. Wow, I probably butchered about half those names. Definitely got Twi'lek right, though. Yes. Unfortunately, there's no list that specifically says what Cathar can successfully breed with. We know, because Javiik is a Cathar, he must have at least some Cathar blood in his bloodline, his heritage, and most likely has quite a bit. He doesn't exactly look like a half-breed. Another interesting fact about breeding and species in the Star Wars universe is that the Sith, the pure-blood Sith, the true Sith, the species, not the ideology, is that they have a very long history of breeding with other species, and very specifically humans, and that's what created the... Another interesting piece of trivia about different species interbreeding is that Sith, pure-blood Sith, not the ideology, but instead the species, the red species in Star Wars: The Old Republic, have a very long history of interbreeding with humans. Long ago, human Dark Jedi began to interbreed with Sith priestesses, and over time, the Sith purebloods were bred out, and that left behind just the Sith. But since we are actually playing a long time ago, we actually have Sith purebloods kicking around still. So now let's bring this back to the question. Is Javiik actually related to Lord Calig? We don't know Lord Calig's race. We do know that he could be a Cathar, and that would be the easiest solution to be related to Javiik. But aliens were not really respected in the Sith Empire. They only started rolling slaves and other species into the Academy very recently, and we found that out by playing our class story. Day 1, he was a slave and an alien, 2 points against him. We also have the idea that maybe he's a human or a Sith, or another species that could maybe breed with Cathar. We don't have a list that specifically strikes out species that could have children with a Cathar missus. Heck, we don't even technically know that Lord Calig is Mr., but I think we're going to be pretty safe to assume that for now. And so here's what you guys had to say about that question, and you guys had a lot of opinions, and really divisive ones too. So I'm going to go through everything you guys had to say and all your cool ideas before I make a decision myself. Darth Lacoris Knox kept it short and sweet. What about this? Calig just sensed Javik's potential and wants to control him. That's why he's lying to him. And that was one of the ideas I had. If Lord Calig isn't actually blood-related, maybe he's just manipulating him. Lee was also thinking along the same lines. If Javiik has to be related to Calig, it would be far too convenient in my opinion. I vote for the following. Calig is not his ancestor. Instead, Calig sensed Javik's natural talents with his wielding of the Force and seized the opportunity to use him for his own ends. In the future, that might serve as yet another lesson to Javiik about the ways of the Sith and their manipulative schemes that don't cease to exist even after their deaths. Anna Sumner is also a fan of the manipulation theory. They said, "I don't think so. Far more likely that Javiik being actually related. Because it would be even harder for a Cathar in Tulak Horde's time to be a Sith Lord. Would be for him to be messing with Javiik, so he is more willing to do whatever Calig asks of him, blood relation and all. Maybe he was going to say that to anyone who entered his tomb." So you guys were pretty skeptical. This wasn't going to be an all-in, of course Javik's related. And then there were some other interesting ideas that they were related in some sense, if not blood. And this is what Cassandra had to say. Calig is obviously the wrong race to be related to Javiik, but I think Calig knows this, and although Calig feels the bond, all Calig wants to do is manipulate Javiik. I think Calig is using the remnants of this old bond to try and find a way to get a body again. Sith have done things like that in the past, and if Calig has no living descendants, a forced bond might be enough. So, with Cassandra's idea, they won't have a blood bond, but they might eventually have a forced bond. Wouldn't you say that's even closer than blood related? Continuing on with the idea that they're related, but not necessarily by blood, Dratkuff had this idea. Maybe Lord Shallan, not Javiik, is related to Calig. When Lord Shallan empowered Javiik, he also transferred a bit of his essence, which is what Calig now senses. And that is a very interesting idea. A lot of you guys have different guesses about what happened when Lord Shallan, and if you don't remember, that is Javik's former master who helped him get into the academy. In a pure roleplay sense, this doesn't happen in the actual story in the game. Lord Shallan hid his own master's lightsaber in his study, where one day foolish Javiik as a slave found it. And it did something that triggered Javik's force powers and made them bloom, a true catalyst. But maybe it was more than a catalyst. We also know Lord Shallan was doing all kinds of crazy experiments. We just don't know what they are. And Vlad also had a similar type of idea. How about this? Lord Shallan's master was Calig's descendant, and he was the last of the line, and when he was dying right next to Lord Shallan, he transferred a part of his essence into his lightsaber. And maybe Lord Shallan promised to find some way to continue his bloodline, knowing how Lord Shallan became proficient with Sith alchemy and that sort of stuff, and that is indeed the very experiment that Lord Shallan has performed with Javiik and the lightsaber. And that is a very interesting idea. Vlad took it all the way back to Javik's master's master and said he was related to Lord Calig, and then once again that was the transference of a little bit of essence to Javiik that Lord Calig sensed and maybe somehow mistook Javiik as his own ancestor in that way, or maybe he just didn't understand exactly what he was sensing. Now let's step away from that theory and pretend for a second that somehow it actually does make sense for Javiik and Lord Calig to be related. Once again, we do not have a list of definite species that cannot breed with Cathar, only ones that specifically can. We don't, maybe for all we know, humans can breed with Cathar, just nobody's done a proper try of it, or nobody's written down in a book or anything like that. Maybe Lord Calig is actually a Sith, and that would also possibly work. We don't know for sure that they can't breed, we just don't actually know for sure that they can. And here's what Taram has to say. I don't think the game actually gives you a race for Calig, so he could be anything, but after almost 2,000 years, I'm pretty sure Javiik would be almost 99.99% Cathar, even if Calig was a human male who somehow managed to interbreed with a Cathar woman. I do like the idea of them being blood related. I think that, given that Javiik has lost his entire family, even a relative as distant as Calig would be a welcome thing. And let's face it, who wouldn't want Calig as a grandpa? And Mr. Game Utopia also is on team Calig Javiik related. I think Lord Calig should be part of Javik's heritage. Maybe some points at past lineage, one of his ancestors was human. The reason I say human is I think Lord Calig is human. Despite that, we don't know what his race is, due to the fact he wears a mask. And Vexus also had a kind of idea like that. Perhaps Calig is simply a great ancestor who intermingled with multiple races, diluting his own future bloodline and thus ruining their future within the Empire. This would also explain why Javiik is so timid. He's barely related to Calig. This caused his Sith blood to be diluted to the point where it would take great effort and power to simply awaken his Sith potential. And this is something really interesting that I read on the Sith species, also on Wikipedia. By 3642 BBY, it was estimated that 97.8% of the Sith Empire's population had some amount of Sith ancestry, but the amount was usually insufficient to express itself in any noticeable way. So yeah, if somewhere along the way a Mrs. Cathar had a baby with Mr. Calig, whether he was a human or a Sith or something else, it would probably be okay. Javiik wouldn't look any different than he does today. And Joseph came in with an idea about what led to Calig's downfall. What if Calig had an affair with a Cathar that was kept secret, but another Sith found out and used the information to undermine Calig, and then the real family of Calig plotted against the family of Javiik, leading to a feud that lasted for generations? This fits in with what we know about Alderaanian politics, as families feud for generations. This feud eventually led to Javiik being enslaved as an example to others. Last line doesn't quite line up with what we've decided for our story, but it's really fun to try and guess what exactly led to Lord Calig's downfall. He mentioned he could have really done something amazing for his lineage and ensured its success, but he failed. Lord of the Betrayed actually argues that, hey, maybe Lord Calig could have been a Cathar. I really think Calig should be related to Javiik, actually blood related. The old Sith Empire was a meritocracy that actually had aliens. Few, yes, but still among their ranks, so it wouldn't be too far of a stretch to assume Calig was a Cathar. Because Cathar and humans can't produce hybrid offspring, other species like Twi'lek and Zabrak can. Assassin's Den has some more ideas about how he wouldn't be Cathar. Here's the thing about the Sith species. They were able to interbreed with quite a few species. Humans and Kashiri are confirmed to have created genetically viable hybrids, but there's also theories that the Anzati having Sith in their genetics due to intermingling in the days before the rise of the Republic. I'll always learn about so many new words and species and Star Wars terms from you guys. So the fact that both Sith and Cathar are both mammals and humanoid makes interbreeding possible, coupled with how Calig is known to be pro-alien. He may have either taken a Cathar wife or had a liaison with a Cathar woman and got her pregnant, and that Sith blood carried all the way down to Javiik. He had an interesting comment to add to that. Here's an interesting tidbit about the Cathar. They mate for life, a fact that angered Silvar in the Tales of the Jedi comics, when her mate, Credo, turned to the dark side and died in the Kron supernova that destroyed Khem's homeworld. So, if Calig did indeed take a Cathar wife, who had Cathar Sith children, they'd be her only children after Calig was assassinated, and would carry all the way through the generations down to Javiik, which is why Calig would sense his own bloodline in Javiik. And that brings me back to the question that I have to choose an answer for. Is Javiik blood related to Lord Calig? I thought by going through all of these amazing comments, it would help guide my decision, but it only brought up way more questions and so many interesting ideas. I think my favorite two so far are that on Team Javiik blood related is that Lord Calig was a Sith who was in love or had an affair with a Cathar woman, and that was passed down through the generations. On the other hand, I actually really like the idea that Javiik and Lord Calig are not actually blood related, but either his master or his master's master were, and that Lord Calig is sensing their presence some way in Javiik. Because that is a truly very, very unique kind of idea, and something that would only happen in our wonderful little Javiik storyline. This isn't something you'd make up just by hearing the Star Wars story alone. So we're going to use the ultimate decision-making test I have in my hand. 1 American quarter. On one side is an eagle. The other side is some guy with curly hair. Heads, Javiik is actually related to Lord Calig. Tails, there's some kind of relation, but it's not blood. Here we go. The George Washington has it! Javiik is related to Lord Calig by blood. I'm hoping I don't regret that method of choosing later. but this has probably been one of my favorite Wonder Talks of all time so far, and this has been one of the ones I enjoyed reading your guys' comments the most, so thank you for sticking around for this really fun episode. And for this whole series, it really makes my day to come by and see your guys' interesting comments. You guys just have so much imagination and so much knowledge of all the little bits and pieces of Star Wars lore. I love it so much. So here's what the story will be. A long, long time ago, in a galaxy even further away, Lord Calig was under an attack. And I thought he and a Cathar she could make a little Cathar baby. And maybe cut the interbreeding list a little slack. But their response, it didn't thrill us. They locked Wikipedia's doors and tried to kill us. We escaped from that gas, then met Javiik on Roman Cass. We took a speeder from the scene. We'll go to Balmora to see the Queen. We'll all wind up on Tatooine. And that's where we'll see his dad. Oh my, this here Javiik guy may be arriving someday later, now he's just a small fry. He left his home and kissed his mommy goodbye, singing soon I'm gonna be a... Wait. This song is just not appropriate. I'll see you guys on the next Wonder Talk with a new question. And as always, I hope you're enjoying the wonder of Star Wars: The Old Republic.
You're not Revan. Not yet, at least. But you're something.